Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for attending the Future of Tendermint session. Please find a seat at your convenience. Today we're going to have just a very informal discussion, informal because I just don't want to take this too seriously. Conversation about where Tendermint is going, both as an ecosystem and as a software project. And with us today we have Mr. Alex Simmerl, XLA. Do you want to come in? Okay. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us. We have XLA, who was a maintainer on Tendermint Core, and Ethan Buchman, who I think also worked on it at some point. So just to set the stage, maybe most of you know Tendermint in different respects, but we'll sort of contextualize the conversation to keep us oriented. Tendermint has been around for quite some time now, and already it has a mainnet built on it. As such, there are many mainnets, including the Cosmos Hub, which are deployed on the core consensus algorithm, which is the Tendermint software. As a mature project, it's had many people work on it at many different times for many different reasons, and the code that lies there is an artifact of that evolution. So one of the main questions that I have is, as a mature software project, how do you maintain velocity? How do you keep responding to requirements and keep motivation up for people that have maybe tried to do something and could not, or things that don't happen the first time but maybe happen over many iterations?
Wow, hard question, good question. So I guess the main thing that maintains the motivation, I guess there's two main things. One is there are real users and they seem to be deriving value, and there's almost nothing as enjoyable or fulfilling as knowing that you built something that other people are using and value. So seeing that continue to happen, I think drives a lot of us to continue to ship and to continue to address issues and work on things. And not just that, also the fact that there seem to be more users than we know about. Very early on, it's all the users, they're in Slack, they talk to you every day, they complain when things break and so on. And you're aware of them, you talk to them, and then over time, you try to keep up with all the users, and then, eventually you find out, you realize that there's way more users that you don't know than ones you do know, and then sometimes the only time you find out about those users is when you broke something they relied on, and they show up on GitHub to say, hey, I've been using Tendermint for 3 years, I've never had to speak to you before, but you just broke this critical thing, and I need you to fix it. And it's well, cool, I'm gonna fix it, so that's motivating. I think the other thing is that there are some just the domain here is riddled with interesting problems, really interesting, deep computer science problems at many different levels. The networking side, the storage side, the crash tolerance, the fault tolerance, the formal verification, good clean architecture and testing, the relationship with the application and ABCI and supporting different kinds of clients and so on. So there's just so many interesting problems to go after in one code base that in itself, I think continue. I've been working on Tendermint Core for over 4 years now, and it's evolved quite a bit, and it still continues to bring up new things I haven't thought about, and I'm always learning new things, and that is incredibly invigorating.
So picking up on some of the things that you said about a changing user base deriving value, as one of the maintainers or the core maintainers at Tendermint Core, how have you sort of witnessed the influx of issues and the places where issues and pull requests are coming from change over time, and what sort of trajectory do you see going forward, and what do you think the best way for us to mediate that as a community? How should we change from maybe a core development team being responsible, choosing to maybe more of a community-led effort?
So besides the reports that we get in from people who run into actual problems and see can't make sense out of a certain state that the network got into, I think one thing that I'm seeing is that Tendermint as a project doesn't really know what its service is to a large extent, right? What is the actual product that we offer? What is the thing that makes it unique and really appealing to people, right? It's might be the APCI. Shapes fit it up to be that way. That this might be the interface that you really care about when it comes to how do you present that and how do you communicate the upsides of the project. And because it's said influx, right? Like we have a couple of different channels. The main is the issues, and like moving that and putting that into perspective is one of the biggest challenges. And as a trajectory forward, I think, and it also goes back to the question before, like in terms of what we do to keep velocity, we have this constant negotiation around our process, right? How do we effectively prepare our changes to make it even manageable for the core contributors who like are on the project full time, and hopefully like also that informs our contributions from the outside. And I think that's the only way forward. Building the right processes and tools for people to contribute in a safe way that they feel safe, and we also get confidence from their contributions.
Yeah, so this will building up a little on that. Like usually in a retrospective, you can kind of reflect on like what would you want to do more of in terms of process for integrated media, maybe what would you want to do less of. So maybe you could talk about what you'd like to do less of, and maybe Alex can talk about what we should do a little bit more of.
I would like to do less of talking about how important it is to break up large PRs.
So you want to keep bigger PRs?
No, I want to do more of having small PRs
Oh,
without having to ask for them.
So you just gave me the retrospect.
I may have gone with the what I want more of.
No,
I definitely want less of large PRs. Sometimes this is a challenge. Less of, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure. I have to think about that one.
Yeah. And what do you think we should do more of? And don't say have more small PRs.
Yeah.
So, I think what we really can get better at is a product-driven conversation. Like we have so many, as you would say, so many people who use the software without ever really vocalizing it. I don't want to use the public channels, but more like see it like what does it mean for Tendermint as a product to exist, to go forward, to also have accountability. So I think that is like having it more as a product discussion. I think that would be nice, and having input from people from that perspective, and really go out, see the use cases, emphasize with the customer, emphasize with the people who use it and build amazing things on it. And yeah, more like closer to how it affects actually the changes we make, how it affects the people, and not only a singular view of like, wow, what does the Cosmos Hub need, which is definitely one of the biggest drivers, but also honing the tool towards wide variety of applications.
Yeah, I think that really characterizes sort of like the high level or community or even ecosystem vision forward, or like things that concretely will improve, but it'd be nice to get like even a little bit more technical into the software artifact that is there today. Doesn't stand alone in the ecosystem. There are comparative blockchains that have similar problem domains and competing customer bases. What would you say are the large things that we can expect Tendermint to deliver that will better position it on technical merits and not just on like what are we going to do with that customer insight?
Well, it's a good question. Without trying to sound arrogant or biased, I mean, it seems to be the leading mature implementation of a BFT protocol that can run on the public internet. I don't know that anything really approaches it yet. Anything else? I mean, certainly there have been tons of improvements at the protocol layer. Lots of researchers, the hot stuff out of VMware is certainly very interesting, and some of what Polkadot is working on. But there's a lot still to do. Like a lot of what Jarko was talking about is even just like improving on the current state of things from correctness guarantees perspective, which is people that's not like it's not shiny new features like we're announcing. It's not like something to announce like we're refactoring the code to make it cleaner. It's like, well, it doesn't really benefit any user other than other developers, right? But it brings the code into a position where it's actually easier and manageable to start introducing new features. And I have some fear that before we can really go drive a whole ton of new functionality, there's a lot of debt to still clean up, to position ourselves for that and to be able to better test it. Sometimes it's funny, I keep hearing from people, they come and they tell me, they tell us like how clean the Tendermint code base is, and I'm sitting here and I'm like, what are you talking about?
But that's a very good question. It's like, the complexity of the code seems to have sufficient subjectivity to it that you get different reports.
Well, when we compared to the alternatives, right? So what is the alternative, right? So you look out into the space of kind of other blockchain projects, and I guess the state of the code bases there is, even more difficult to understand or whatever. I mean, I don't read through other code bases enough, but from the work we've been doing kind of in the Tendermint team with the dev sessions and kind of talking really through the hard problems and why they're hard and, why did this bug show up? Why didn't we catch it in testing? It was like, oh, because it was hard to test this. Oh, because the code was too complex to get this kind of test in an easy, and so it really surfaces all the thorns that you don't see kind of, my first time through the code base I was like, wow, this is amazing. I've been working with Go Ethereum, I looked at Hyperledger and other things. It's like all these, in comparison, it's great, but then you start to service all these issues. But so as we're kind of addressing the technical debt, the major things we want to be able to work towards, are obviously things like state syncing, which is a big request from everyone to be able to, just ship the latest state of an application. We want to work towards major optimizations at the consensus layer to be able to do things like threshold signatures and aggregated signatures. And there are people kind of like D-Gaming, just open sourced. Is there D-Gaming someone in the room? No? D-Gaming just open sourced. They're like a threshold signature modification of Tendermint so that they can aggregate signatures, and that's amazing, and it'd be cool to upstream that. But I almost feel like there's too much refactoring and technical debt to address before we could really bring those in. So it's nice to see the community willing to charge forward and experiment with things, but then there's this weird tension that's well, before we upstream that, there's a lot of things we want to fix, right?
Yeah.
So figuring out that prioritization is a constant challenge.
That's a good question. How do we figure out that prioritization and also that communication? So one thing that might be interesting for people sort of getting on the Tendermint bandwagon is to really understand what the nature of some of the refactoring is. I don't know if you can characterize it, and then perhaps saying a little bit about how, as a potential community member, or maybe someone who's already invested, should you sort of participate or at least plan around some of the things that are happening. So maybe characterization, and then how is it going to affect customers?
Yeah. So, and that's also where I would disagree with the refactorings or the efforts to increase the quality of the code base. I think it is user based, because at the core, what we all want is confidence, and collectively say, yeah, we get behind this, that this is doing what it's supposed to do or what it is spec to do, right? So, and that ties into Zarko's talk earlier, and also your talk in the morning, is that we now at in a place where we can't always say with certainty that the code behaves in the way that we expect it to. So I think the major theme of all our efforts currently is to crystallize the core components in a way that they are easy to test and easy to validate. And ideally, and in turn, for both sides, write a specification on that, or make sure that it is according to the spec. So I think that's one of the most outstanding parts of the Tendermint project in general, is that the research side is very sound. And there's been a lot of time and a lot of effort been done to validate that the assumptions or the claims we make are correct, and we're not in the place yet for the code. And that is for core components like the blockchain reactor, the consensus, and all the other parts as well. Does it answer?
Yeah, I think that's fantastic.
And that's probably true. And I think all of us are, still we see the kind of research effort, and okay, we're formally verifying things now. It's like, well, how do we bring this to the code? And this is where some of our, I guess, frustration with the current state of things derives. But then at the same time, the thing is running in production on the public internet, breaking boundaries on distributed systems and consensus, things that have never been done before, and not failing, and just continuing to work. And every day that goes by where the Cosmos Hub is still working, it's 6 sexy blocks times with hundreds of nodes, it's like a miracle, right? So it builds a lot of confidence.
It's
right?
a form of validation for sure.
Yeah, but then it's okay, now we need to change something. It's like, well, I don't want to touch it.
Don't do that.
That's what the Cosmos Hub is a very late stage in the Q&A process. So, and I think also what the expected outcome is that we gain so much confidence in the reference implementation and also enough material that we can actually diversify the implementation of Tendermint and therefore also diversify the networks and make them even more resilient in other dimensions than, for example, the civil resistance.
Yeah.
So I have sort of one more question that's like a continuation of this stream of conversation, which I think is fantastic. But I just want to say, after that question, it'd be really nice if maybe you had some questions. I'll give you like a period to jump in as you like. So continuing on for this formal verification stream of thought seems to be quite core to the future of Tendermint. And that might have emerged because it's, as you say, there's actual several real-world mainnets. Sort of, it matters. The fact that this thing is working correctly matters increasingly more than it working at all. Like, I actually would rather it would break than be going to production with a fault that was exploitable. How would you compare and contrast sort of the Tendermint team's trajectory towards providing formally verified software, like actually characterizing that process, versus other processes? Like what other path could Tendermint take if it would not take in the current path towards providing more value to its customers?
Interesting. I guess, I mean, the current path is really driven by, well, there's a few things. One is like, okay, you know, the Tendermint protocol emerged in 2014 when Jay wrote the original white paper. In 2015, after I started working with him and we started running a lot of test nets, we started to make a bunch of changes to make the consensus implementation a lot more kind of asynchronous, and that gave us the algorithm that we had, from 2015. And then, 2016, I wrote a master's thesis on it and tried to formalize it a little bit with my rudimentary knowledge of any of this stuff. And then, it wasn't until late 2017, so this is now, 2.5 years after we've been pushing this thing, and we had what we thought were pretty sound proofs of safety and liveness. And then Jarko shows up, and after a few months, he's like, guys, it's broken. Like, you don't have liveness, so the thing doesn't terminate if, depending on, so. And this was a little bit, in some respect, it was kind of unsurprising. I remember when I first met Jay, he's like, I have a consensus algorithm, and I was like, I bet you it's broken. And I was like, I bet you could oscillate forever. And he was like, no, it works, check it out, there's this locking thing. I was like, oh, and I failed to figure out how it was broken. I was like, okay, I guess it works. And Jarko shows up, and after a couple months, he's like, no, it's broken. And then, and figured out how to fix it. I mean, there are a bunch of ways to fix it, and and then we worked on a fix and wrote a more formal paper. But that event, in some respect, really hit home how important it is to have real proper formal verification. You want to go around making strong claims, and what is the basis for your claim, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, it's because a couple guys sat in a room for a while and wrote some code and it seemed to work, and they thought about it, and it's like that versus actually formal process for verifying. And so if you talk about an alternative, I don't really see a viable alternative for a system that is potentially as critical as what Tendermint is being positioned to become, that doesn't include highly formalized correctness oriented processes. And so something that was devoid of that, or devoid of something that at least looked like that, I think would be very precarious and worrying, right? I mean, you could just plow forward, and a lot of people do and will plow forward, but to the extent that we're talking about real critical systems, very high value public goods running on top of the software, what is another avenue that doesn't include formal verification? Is there one, that could be responsible? I don't know.
That's super.
What about the enterprise support?
Enterprise.
We have friends here from Clearmatics.
Sure. So the alternative is to just say to have support staff and say if there's a bug, we're going to commit to be able to fix it very quickly.
I mean, supporting different kind of network properties, not being as generic as we are right now, but saying that if you have full connectivity, then you can be. This is the version of it.
Sure.
It's much more optimized for that case, and you can hire someone also.
But are you saying? My understanding of the question was how could the project evolve in a way that isn't quite as aligned with this formal verification?
Yeah,
right?
I was thinking maybe I misunderstood Sean, but it's more question is where we are putting our effort.
Yeah.
So like right now it seems it's a lot about correctness, and so
And that's
instead of-
driven by the high value networks and
Yeah,
so on.
exactly.
That's what
And
you're
so
saying.
like so essentially like instead of doing this, we could potentially try to
Sure.
support different scenarios. But,
Sure.
it stays, the correctness aspect stays. Also, like
Yeah.
this doesn't invalidate the other stuff.
Yeah.
It's just that we could potentially, like look at other deployment scenarios and not just be mostly driven by Cosmos Hub.
Yeah. But I mean, it's not even just the Cosmos Hub, it's kind of the public, highly adversarial, high value setting, right?
So I can speak of pragmatic. So we were looking for formality verifying Tendermint cases. So maybe join effort on this.
That would be great. Yeah, we'd love help. Yeah.
But most of the correctness that we've done is independent data, not an Cosmos one. That
That's
is
right.
Like, oh, I mean,
That's right.
Tendermint is quite sound, but the consensus, 12+1, BFT traditional, that like all the Cosmos additional layers. I mean, it's very difficult to
It's very hard. And
prove
so,
them because it's economics and maybe it's not.
Yeah.
Like you don't have the boundaries that you have in computer science,
Yeah.
so you can be like the god of the world and they say, okay, we
And-
want this
Yeah.
inflation or whatever, but
and so what's happened? So what we did at the Cosmos, it's cool to be able to just see Chris through the glass here. But Chris's efforts on getting correctness out of the Cosmos Hub have been tremendous and absolutely critical, because that is as far as I know the most complex state machine running on a public blockchain. Like, too complex to actually test all the cases, the unit case. There's so many interactions, and trying to formalize that and write it in a model and verify properties of it is going to take years, many of them. And so what the approach there was, okay, let's build a simulator, right? And let's use randomness, and let's try to drive as many possible execution trajectories and paths as possible. And that simulator has caught so many bugs before the thing has shipped that I don't know what we would have done without it, right? And it's continuing to get, so the foundation is funding a project called Icarus, and they're here. They'll be talking tomorrow, where they're trying to now bring machine learning to bear on the simulator, right? So that they can say, okay, the simulator kind of uses this naive random seed and just go simulate a bunch of stuff. Maybe we can be more intelligent about the seed and kind of drive higher coverage, right? And in a sense, there's a point at which intelligent simulations and like formal verification-oriented model checking, kind of converge, right? And when I was telling Jack, the SDK kind of product manager, was talking about like formal verification and model checking, he's like, yeah, we do all that on the SDK already, like, like, oh, okay, yeah, you have a simulator, like, it's pretty good, it's pretty amazing. The challenges though, the Cosmos Hub execution is single-threaded. It's a single thing, right? So it's a lot easier to write a simulation for that. And even though there are all these kind of interactions, there's still like one straight path through it. Whereas when you're trying to verify something like Tendermint, it's inherently highly concurrent. You have faults. You don't really have to model faults in the Cosmos Hub layer, right? It's just like a deterministic state machine, right? This thing is a highly non-deterministic concurrent execution environment. So writing a simulator for that is much more difficult, and getting coverage out of it and so on. And that's where the formal verification stuff, can really help you know that actually you're covering everything, because this is how the thing was designed.
Just to come back to the Buchman question, so what I wanted to say actually that instead of focusing on correctness, we could focus on efficiency.
Say that again?
On efficiency.
On efficiency,
Or
sure,
performance.
sure.
So this
Or
would be-
product, or
like this would
usability.
probably be a clear option.
Sure,
Like
sure,
instead of
sure.
focusing on correctness,
Yeah.
we can try to make it as much as efficient in all, like various network scenarios and for different kind of applications.
Yeah.
But right now, it seems that like that we are much more convinced that correctness is more important.
Yeah.
And that correctness can drive and help us be, also take the efficiency or performance concern as a follow-up step.
Exactly.
Once we have much
Exactly.
more sound control of what's in.
Because the problem with the efficiency thing is, okay, there's a lot of code here, and you go and you change something to make it more efficient, and now what did you break? It's like, do you have enough tests to cover all that? Well, we know for sure we don't have enough tests, because there's been bugs in the past. The coverage isn't 100%, and even if it was, it's a highly non-deterministic concurrent system. So we do need to focus on efficiency, we do need to focus on usability and all these other things, but doing that without also focusing on correctness feels somehow irresponsible. Yeah.
So it sounds like to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the perspective from the Tendermint team is that it's more or less feature complete, and that most of the efforts are put on sort of stabilizing its current product offering. Is there any areas of which we can openly challenge that trajectory and say that maybe what Tendermint offers is not good enough, and that making it better in this respect won't give it access to more customers?
So
Go ahead.
There's
Definitely
a-
not
there-
feature complete.
there's a lot of complexity here that we need to unpack in order to answer this properly, right? Like first of all, there's a lot of things that we would like to do, and like some of those ideas for features and extensions go back to 2016 or 17. If you look at the depth of the issues on the project.
What are your favorite ones?
One of my favorite ones, all-time favorite, like introducing libp2p. It's an ongoing. I don't know, there may be like 4 issues.
Who's responsible for that?
I don't know, nobody point speakers.
Two of you.
No, but there's a larger issue with the project in how to direct effort and how to direct our energy. And that goes back to the organizational details that the Tendermint project is embedded in. Because there's the ICF, which is a non-profit Swiss foundation, then there's the, I don't know what the official is, the Tendermint Inc. these days? Is it
All in Tendermint.
All in Tenderbits, which has like different subsidiaries.
Tender bits,
Which has different subsidiaries. So there's definitely issues around who owns the project and who spends their time to advance it, and kind of the people who are currently working on it might not be the people who are going to continue working on it. So there is this weird limbo, this maintenance limbo almost. What we're trying to do is like damage control at the moment. I think one of the things that we really focus on, just like speak concretely on the feature, is to save the hard drives. I mean, one issue that we have is that
Operation Save the Hard Drives. Very important.
so the blockchain is bound to grow very quickly, and that put a lot of pressure on node operators, to the point that it might be even unattainable to operate a Tendermint node in a year from now. So it's really like maintenance at the moment. We try to improve things. We have ongoing refactorings, as you know. But yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty around that. Maybe you can unpack it further, like what it actually means for the ICF and its time investment or deployment.
Sure. Yeah, I mean there has been demand and there has yet been supply for like more formal support, say from a product perspective, right? I mean there's a lot of people starting to run Tendermint in various kind of production contexts, and there isn't really an offering anywhere. I mean, maybe there are, we just don't know about them, but certainly not from either of those entities yet, to support those kind of enterprise or private deployments, or even certain public ones. And, you know, it's something that Tenderbits, I like that you know, it seems to be in the Tenderbits wheelhouse, you know, but the focus is, you know, currently everyone is so consumed with kind of Cosmos-oriented stuff, you know, and that's like the main, you know, a main value driver, and there's some notion that, you know, that once we're in an IBC world, you know, every Tendermint chain or every interesting Tendermint chain is in one way or another going to connect in with kind of, you know, the IBC mechanisms and say the rest of Cosmos or the larger kind of interchain. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like yet. So I think there's been some hesitation to kind of build too much of that support capacity and in some sense get bogged down in it while the kind of the future ecosystem of deployments is still kind of developing and is still kind of uncertain, and we don't know how that's going to work and how things are going to fit together. And while we still know that there's to address, and so, you know, partially this is further motivating the effort to like really nail down specifications, like what is this thing beyond a software artifact, right? What is the actual common thing that anyone who's kind of involved in a Tendermint project agrees on that actually, you know, is the underlying thing here. You know, and this is where, you know, the spec for the consensus and the consensus gossip and the different reactors is super important. And also for like the ABCI layer, right? And the ABCI layer is kind of envisioned as this something that should be ideally much more general than just Tendermint. You know, when it was created in like 2015, it was like, well, you know, there's going to be lots of different blockchain engines that are going to implement ABCI, and anyone who builds an app on ABCI will be able to run on all of those. And that we haven't seen that happen yet. You know, there are a lot of other engines, and basically none of them except Tendermint implements ABCI. And even other, you know, Tendermints implemented out in the wild aren't even using the ABCI. You know, the Clearmatics guys are about to implement Tendermint in, you know, a Go Ethereum context, and almost certainly won't use the ABCI because it's like not really necessary. And the ABCI kind of boundary forces certain things on you that certain use cases might not want, right? Like, so for instance, if you're trying to build into the, you know, the climatic circumstance, like, I can talk about this? Yeah. Just, yeah, okay, good, yeah. So, you know, the climatics circumstance was like, well, you know, we want Ethereum on Tendermint, but we also want Ethereum's peer-to-peer layer, right? We want the Ethereum, like, peer stack. So that we can integrate with their network and get their nodes and so on, right? And it's like, well, you know, on the other side of things, we're building Ethermint, and it's like Ethermint is like to us like the obvious way to do the Ethereum Tendermint integration, right? Like you have this nice Tendermint thing, you have this Go Ethereum thing, you have the ABCI, it's a nice interface between them, you put it on top. But when you do that, you lose everything on the other side of ABCI from the original ecosystem you're drawing from, right? So with Ethereum, it stops, you know, at the state machine. You don't get any of the, you know, you don't get the mempool dynamics, you don't get the any of the peer-to-peer, so you lose the DHT and all this kind of stuff. And so, you know, from trying to reason about that from a product perspective, you know, try to convince these guys like, well, no, you don't need Ethereum with P2P. Like, we made the right product, so you know, like that's not necessarily productive. But you know, it goes back to like this lib P2P idea. It's like, well, maybe the ABCI was actually the right place to draw the boundary, but the rest of the ecosystem hasn't matured or converged yet onto the common peer-to-peer standards, that we don't have to have these battles about like which peer-to-peer layer to use, you know, dev P2P or lib P2P or Tendermint, because, you know, maybe one day we'll all just converge and we'll all use the same one, and then we'll have, you know, again a boundary between kind of consensus engines and the peer-to-peer stack. And I think that was always kind of the vision, that there's like the peer layer, this like replication layer, and then the application layer, right? And if we can get the right boundaries, you know, then we can really get kind of the modularity that the Tendermint project always kind of claimed or, you know, pontificated about, but you know, we're not there yet. So the
So a question.
She also wanted to ask,
Oh, thank you. I was looking for a time check.
is there a plan for version 1? I think this has been asked a lot of times, but is it version 1.0 for
There's a milestone.
how many issues? 140 or something?
The answer is yes.
So
Thanks for
yes, so this is an interesting problem, right? And it also goes back to the product question of like, what is the surface of Tendermint? You know, and so 1.0 for who or for what? I mean, the thing is running in production, but the production circumstance it runs in is such that you're expected to eventually, you know, to every so often dump the state, throw away the blockchain, and start again. It's like, okay, is that really production? You know, that's not production in, you know, enterprise, in the enterprise world, right? So hitting a 1.0 for enterprise isn't going to happen. You can't even plan for that until you plan for a team to actually support that in those use cases. So I as far as I can tell, and you know, I can't really speak for Alma Bits anymore, but you know, that seems like not in the cards right now. You know, maybe that'll change, but like someone actually needs to build a support team and think about Tendermint as an enterprise product, and it seems that you know, that's not really the exciting use case, you know, for a lot of people, and everyone's focused on, you know, the public networks and so on. So if we talk about, okay, we want to hit a 1.0 for the public networks, and just you know, and have some. What does that mean? It's really about having some guarantee that for a significant amount of time the thing's not going to break again for, you know, a set of APIs, right? I suspect it will not be. I suspect we can do that by the end of the year, and I think I've said that for the last 3 years. So, you know, awesome. But no, but the what?
Just doing time check, sorry.
Okay.
10 minutes.
The way I've been looking at it is I see, you know, one major breaking change to Tendermint, to the blockchain data structures, this year. I mean, there's a lot of breaking changes we still want to make to the data structures, and the goal, as far as, you know, insofar as I'm trying to organize and manage the priorities and so on, is to combine all those things and do it in a single upgrade where we, you know, potentially reduce the size of the header, reduce the size of the commits, maybe make a few other changes here or there, and have that be kind of the last thing we have to do as part of Operation Save the Hard Drives, and from there be able to say, okay, this is, you know, 1.0 now, we're not going to break ABCI again or any of these other things. We'll continue to break Go APIs because, you know, the Go developers can deal with that a little bit better, and have that be stable for, you know, like that. Have that be stable for at least 6 months, if not a year. But, you know, we know that there's more changes we want. Like, we want to bring in threshold signatures or aggregate signatures, and, you know, that, bring randomness into things and so on. And so whether or not we'll be able to bring those in without breaking again, you know, it's not totally known yet if we'll be able to get to 1.0 in a way that the code, you know, accommodates future changes without breaking. That's really the challenge. Is to, so much of the code is written in like tightly coupled ways where the, you know, the same data structure that's used for serialization is used for representing things in memory is used in the specification, you know, and so if you break one tiny thing, well, you've broken all those APIs, right? And so separating all that stuff in the code to get to a point where you can make changes without breaking everything is going to take a lot of work, and I'm not sure we're really going to have the resources to do that this year while we're trying to ship all these other things, state sync, and, you know, all these other refactors and improvements to position ourselves. So on some fronts we'll be positioning ourselves for that. On others, you know, we just might not be able to. So I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, but, you know, hopefully this year.
Yeah, well, adding on what you said, like, so I see kind of two different approaches, right? Like what Tendermint does is like, okay, you give the consensus protocol, the replication part, that like you have like a degree of freedom for the state machine you're running, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, from the our side or the side, like you actually are fixing the other degree of freedom, which is the state machine you use, the AVM, and then you can plug and play different consensus protocols, right? So like it's like you have 2 degrees of freedom, and the two projects kind of fix one approach. Right? Is any kind of research open or roadmap for Tendermint to actually develop other BFT or non-BFT, let's say, I don't know, randomized BFT, like you can get different flavors of BFT.
As part of the ABCI.
As
Or
part
like
of
under
the
the
BFT,
ABCI.
yeah, not having only
Yeah.
the fixed
So-
consensus protocol with the BFT.
No, it's a good question because despite all this grand rhetoric that, you know, ABCI works for arbitrary consensus, first of all, there aren't any others. Second, there are some very Tendermint specific things coupled into that
Yeah,
interface.
that's
And this is concerning. You know, we just like haven't had to address it, but because no one implemented another, you know, worthy consensus engine yet. But they're coming. You know, Honey Badger is also running in production, and, you know, the POA thing, and you know, the Interstellar guys have consensus engines, and you know, there's various implementations of Raft and so on. And so, what?
Is this something that we, like Tendermint needs to implement in the ABCI, or the custom consensus engine to implement ABCI?
So it would be great if someone actually went and tried to take an existing consensus engine and map it to ABCI. It will probably result. The outcome of that will probably be a requirement to make changes to ABCI to accommodate it, right? The fact that there's only one implementation now means that almost certainly the interface isn't general enough. Or if, you know, or maybe it is, but certain things are going to be weird about it, like you'll have to ignore certain fields or not have access to other fields or something like this, right? Because like the header is quite specific to Tendermint, and you might want your consensus to work kind of differently, and those are kind of design choices. And so whether we can adequately generalize over that surface area, I think is a really interesting open question that it was like part of the holy grail vision that like brought me into the consensus space. Like, can we find a general purpose definition for consensus protocols so that we can actually do this very clean separation between the state machine and the engine? You know, and a lot, it seems we've done a really good job, but a lot of it at the end of the day boils down to the header structure, right? Which ends up being quite specific to what you actually needed in there and what kind of light client guarantees you want to prove and all that. So it really opens this question of like, okay, you know, now you have to start thinking about the light client and potentially IBC style stuff in the design of the ABCI, and that, you know, we didn't really think about all that. And then the other thing is though, about ABCI is that, this is kind of conflated and could use, you know, someone to actually just focus and split things apart, is the distinction between the syntax and the semantics, right? So ABCI as a protobuf, as a set of protobuf files, that's like the syntax, right? That's like nice and clean. But then there's ABCI in terms of like how it's used. When are the messages called? Which connections are they called on? Which messages on which connections? What is the ordering of the events here? What is the expectation? The relationship between the consensus engine and the application, and what is expected about the results, right? And so we've tried to disentangle this a bit in the documentation. So now there's like documentation about the methods and the fields, and then there's separate documentation about writing applications using ABCI, right? And potentially the protobuf thing is sufficient, and where a lot of the changes will be, or a lot of the variation will be in kind of the semantics of how ABCI is used, if you want to introduce a new consensus protocol. But because no one has really done the work yet of trying to map an existing or alternative consensus protocol through ABCI, we don't really know how how it would all shake out.
But you don't consider to actually develop in-house, like.
Oh, we don't. I mean, we're considering developing an alternative implementation of Tendermint
I mean, no,
before
but
we can do that.
budget, the symphony budget, like you don't consider and try to. Like in terms of your,
Yeah.
one of your selling points is being interoperable. Right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't think
It's a matter of resources and onboarding. Right? We have enough growing pains. What are we trying to make me do another consensus algorithm for? Like.
So what if there's another re-implementation of Tendermint in
Yeah.
another language?
Yeah.
In order for it to be ecosystem compatible in Cosmos, they would need to use the ABCI?
Yeah, so that's a lot easier though. So and so this is the plan. So the foundation is, the Interchain Foundation has initiated plans to actually start building an alternative implementation of Tendermint in Rust. And for a number of reasons, and that fits really well, and it's kind of about time that there is a second implementation that would just help the whole ecosystem mature, decentralization, etc. But it would be a lot easier, because it's implementing the same protocol, according to the same specification and so on, it'll be basically trivial to make it satisfy ABCI because there's no difference there, right? And it definitely would. And once you have that, then you have some sense in which, applications written against one version of Tendermint will work on the other, or certainly should. And then you'd be able to run the Cosmos hub, on top of the Go Tendermint and on top of the Rust Tendermint on the same network.
So it sounds like there's a lot of details about the ABCI and about what's happening, but it sounds like the future of Tendermint is Rust. That is the conclusion of our panel. Thank you all for coming. Thanks, Ethan Buchman. Thank you.
Yeah, right.